Part 4. A grand hall filled Philip's eyes, easily equal to that ballroom in the royal palace. No, it was even better than that. He could not help but think of how to show this off to others. Granted, Hilma had arranged the preparations for this venue. However, she had asked him beforehand, "Should I arrange for a regular ballroom event, or an incomparable spectacle? The latter will require a heftier favor in return." And Philip had chosen the latter without any hesitation. In other words, this ball had been organized by the favor Philip had paid for. In other words, this was an event which corresponded to the effort he had put in. And then, there were the many nobles who had gathered here because of him. It was perfect. However, it was because of this that Philip felt very unhappy about a certain detail. He had decided the location on the invitation, though he had to rely on others' wisdom. The final decision had still been his, and the wax seal on the letters had belonged to his family. More importantly, everyone was here to meet the emissary of the Sorceress Kingdom. And it was Philip who had invited that emissary here. In other words, he was the host and the one who had worked to make this happen, so he was the one who should have been receiving words of praise and nods of gratitude. They should have been thanking Philip for inviting him to such an event. They should also have been praising his courage in inviting the emissary of the Sorceress Kingdom, who nobody else had dared approach. Instead, what was happening now? The first person everyone spoke to once they came here was Hilma. Only after that did they come to greet him. In addition, they only did so reluctantly, after Hilma mentioned Philip's name. What would they have done if she had not brought it up? Since he owed Hilma favor, he had to bear with the fact that she was more noticeable than he was. However, all he felt toward those nobles was annoyance. Going by the basics of noble society, it should have been obvious who they should have been addressing first. "That's why you're all a useless lot." It seems accepting Hilma's suggestion was a bad idea. He had invited the nobles here by tapping on Hilma's intelligence. The nobles he had chosen were newly elevated heads of their families thanks to the war with the Sorceress Kingdom, or those who would soon become the heads of their families. In other words, these people were in similar situations to Philip. The reason why he had accepted Hilma's suggestions was because there were not many people who thought like Philip did. If there had been no change in the family leadership, it was very likely that they would all only think ill of the Sorceress Kingdom. However, is there anyone here who isn't incompetent? He looked over the guests who had just arrived, and then he walked toward Hilma. What a cock-up, Philip thought. Those idiots buried in their family trees were truly idiots. That was why they had messed up on the person to whom they should have first spoken to. Or rather, one could say there was no other reason for that. Still, isn't this a good thing? They won't be able to take leadership because they're idiots, right? If there was a noble here with a better brain than mine, I wouldn't be able to take command of the new faction that intend to found, and regretfully, my family isn't that powerful either. This might be a chance for him. Since this was their error, he would consider them to owe him one for not speaking to him first, and then he would collect on it in future. Just as he was plotting eagerly, Hilma appeared before him. She was a woman who was little more than a bag of skin and bones. Her sickly thinness made her look like she had a severe illness. She would probably have been beautiful if she had more meat on her bones, but that was already a thing of the past. Philip-sama, it seems all the invited guests have arrived. Is that so? In other words, they all saw him as number 2 here, Philip thought. He tried to conceal his feelings of inferiority, but Hilma seemed to have seen through him. She cackled. "You seem dissatisfied." "No, certainly not." Philip smiled. He was a nobleman. He could deal with such intrigues. "There's no need to lie. I am your supporter in this because I stand to gain from it, Philip-sama." We cannot have any secrets between us. Her words were tinged with flattery. That was it. Philip's heart quivered. This was the proper attitude a commoner should have toward a noble. He was finally experiencing the situation he had long been looking forward to, and the unhappiness in his heart vanished like it had all been a lie. Is something the matter, Philip-sama? No. Well, come to think of it, I'm not upset, but I am uneasy. What discomforts you? Is something lacking? If that is so, shall I prepare it before the emissary dono arrives? It's not like that, Philip said as he affected a cough. I simply didn't expect the people here to be so unexceptional. Even if I gathered all these people into a faction, I wonder if they could compete with the other factions. That is what discomforts me. I see, so that's how it is. Hilma smiled. She was too skinny to inspire lust. Even so, her charm was such that it made him gulp. But then, isn't it because they're this way that they will need your careful leadership, Philip-sama? I wish to call your attention to your domain. Are the peasants there very intelligent? No. Which is why they need a wise leader. No. Yes, indeed, that's right. If it's you, Philip-sama, I'm sure you'll be able to steer this faction well. I will also provide as much help as I can give, because you stand to gain from it, am I right? But of course, I am helping you because I am certain that I will reap benefits from doing so. Hilma chuckled. The anger in Philip's heart was completely gone. Everything Hilma said was correct. Philip thanked his luck for being able to meet a woman like Hilma. She had broad contacts, great wealth, and had access to a great many things which Philip could not obtain within the royal capital. Her explanation for why someone like her would want to curry favor with him was also quite reasonable. In addition, his terms of repayment were also very simple, which was why he felt at ease in making use of her. If you help me, I will make you wealthier than any other woman. Hilma's eyes widened a little, and then she smiled happily. That would please me very much. I would be glad to be able to wear a necklace set with large gemstones like the noble women do. Then, please work hard, Philip-sama. Leave that to me. Then, may I ask another question of my supporter? Yes, by all means. May I know why you are so slim? Does something about your body trouble you? It would be troublesome if she could no longer support him. If even the priests could not heal her, then he would have to find someone to replace her, or allow her to recommend a successor. Oh, it is not a problem worth mentioning, no. I've heard that some heiresses diet to lose weight. Is that the reason? Hilma smiled. This was the first time Philip had seen a smile which conveyed such unease without words. It's not like that. The fact is, I can no longer eat solid food, so I can only consume drink, and I can't take in too much either. Yes. Please, do not worry. I will have someone use healing magic if it's because of an illness. Her mood returned to normal, as though nothing had happened. I will definitely not die before I profit from our acquaintance, Philip-sama. Oh, really? Then that's good. However, why can't you eat solid food? That had been nothing more than a throwaway statement, but it had a telling impact. It seemed as though all emotion had fled Hilma's face. The change was greater than before, and it made Philip anxious. Is something the matter? My apologies. I simply remembered some things. Hilma covered her mouth as she said that, and she looked very pale. My apologies for making you remember something unpleasant. What had she gone through to make her incapable of eating solid food? While she now enjoyed broad social connections and enough wealth to live in decadence, there must have been a time when she could not eat properly too. He wanted to probe further, but it would probably be a very bad idea to do so. Philip-sama, I believe it is about time to summon the emissary. I believe that if you were to be her escort, everyone would look at you with different eyes. That would prove you were the organizer more than any number of words. It would show who is the most powerful person here. Oh, indeed, that's right. Because she had showed up alone at the royal family's dinner party, Philip had thought that sort of thing was normal. So it was not. It shamed him to know that was not the case, and he put on an act of having forgotten but just remembered. Everyone will surely be surprised. Many who did not come to speak to you will surely feel anxious and uneasy. Philip's armor. A sadistic glee awoke in Philip's heart. Some of the nobles here were higher placed than him and had larger domains than himself. What sort of expressions would they show him, he who had once been regarded as the burden of his family? That's right, it would be bad to keep her waiting. I'll head over. Then, I shall have one of my people show you the way there. Led by one of Hilma's servants, Philip set forth toward the room of the Sorceress Kingdom's emissary, Albedo. He knocked on the door, and then opened it. What he saw behind that door was a woman whose beauty knew no equal. She wore a jet-black dress, a different one from their encounter in the royal palace. Her bare shoulders gleamed like alabaster, and while her necklace consisted of large gemstones linked together, it did not seem tacky, but instead accentuated her beauty. How beautiful! Philip blushed in spite of himself. Then, shall we? Yes. Please permit me to be your escort. Philip took a hand that was sheathed in a black lace glove, and helped Albedo up. A fragrance came from his side. What kind of perfume is this? It makes my heart feel so light. Although he subconsciously wanted to sniff at it, that would have been terribly rude. While the two of them were already walking side by side toward the ballroom, proceeding in silence like this made the air seem heavy. Philip struggled to think of an appropriate topic to bring up, but by the time he had come up with something, they were already near their destination. There are many nobles in the ballroom. All of them have gathered to see you, Albedo-sama. It seemed a little rash, but it nevertheless received an immediate response. Is that really true? Thank you for your assistance, Philip-sama. Albedo smiled tenderly to him, and Philip's heart pounded. While this probably was not the case, could it be that she was starting to like him? He was a man who would soon stand at the top of a great faction. In contrast, the Sorceress Kingdom wielded overwhelming military power, but for now it was little more than a city-state. When one thought of it that way, he was quite the catch himself. Not to mention, he was unmarried too. Come to think of it, are you already wed, Albedo-sama? Albedo froze. He had seen her gentle smile several times already, but this was the first time he had seen that expression on her. Philip felt shame creep up through him as he realized that he had asked an inappropriate question. What a strange thing to ask, Philip-sama. Regretfully, I do not yet have a partner in that capacity, and I am sadly single. Is that so? Given your beauty, I would have expected the suitors to come thick and fast, Albedo-sama. Phew, it is quite a surprise that no such suitors have come my way. Still, such offers would be quite troubling for me, so it is hardly a bad thing, in my opinion. Is that so? Before he reached the door, Philip placed his hand on Albedo's fragrant shoulder, and made to slowly draw her over to him. There was a strange cheery sound. Philip looked to his right to see where it came from. Did something happen? His tiny doubts faded away as Albedo asked him that question with a smile on her face. No, it's nothing. Then, please allow me. What exactly did their eyes see? How did this scene appear to these fancily dressed nobles? Hilma was interested in the answers to those questions. First-class cuisine, first-class servants, first-class utensils, first-class music, and below third-rate trash nobles. The people gathered here were largely good-for-nothing wastes of food, third sons and below who were the spares of spares. They had been forced to bow their heads to the world for various reasons and were filled with resentment. The looks on their faces said everything. Many of them expressed the carefree joy of liberation. Many others were consumed by the flames of desire. To these people, this place was one where they could fully indulge their vanity. Then again, this place had always been intended to be a feeding ground. Noble society in the kingdom was now in a state of chaos. It had been several months since the war with the Sorceress Kingdom, but the scars it left behind were large and could not fully heal. Several factions had dissolved because of this and new ones had risen to take their place. The upper-class noble houses had been displaced by those families which had previously been lower-ranking. The current chaos in the kingdom was an incredibly good chance for all those people who were unaligned to any of the factions. No, it might be their last chance. If the factions established themselves again, they might find themselves banished to the sidelines once more. Because of that, this gathering was a gigantic feeding ground for them. It was one where hungry fish would lure the small fry into their bellies. In contrast, would the small fry be eaten without them ever noticing? Or would they realize something and skillfully disengage? Or perhaps, would there be nobles filled with desire who would turn their tables on their would-be devourers? After studying this scene for nearly an hour, Hilma concluded that there were no nobles here which could be considered first-rate, the kind which she wanted to ensnare with all her might. Even so, she was not disappointed by this outcome. Indeed, she would be worried if there were any first-rate nobles parading themselves in a dangerous place like this. She had been quite careful when sending out her invitations, but Hilma did not think she was perfect. There would surely be someone from one of the factions in here. Still, that would be interesting, she thought. The more she had to say in her report, the more her own value would rise. This was not a bad thing at all for her. Then, it's about time. No. It had been an hour and a half since the ball started, so it was the appointed time. Hilma's real work was only beginning. It was frightening. Her previous arrogance vanished as if it had been nothing more than a lie. Perhaps a gentle term like frightening would not be able to encompass the sheer terror that welled up from her stomach. She thought of fleeing with all her might as she imagined the hell that awaited her if she displeased them. Of course, if she actually did that, she would assuredly suffer a fate which would make that hell feel like blissful paradise. As a member of the Eight Fingers, she had handed down many assassination orders to her underlings. She had also ordered people to be tormented before they were killed. But compared to what those monsters had done, her orders overflowed with the milk of human kindness. Hilma. The voice from behind startled her, and her shoulders twitched. When she turned around, she saw the stupidest man in this hall. Is something wrong? No, Philip Summer, nothing is wrong. Hilma concealed her true emotions within her smile. Among those emotions was anger at being surprised by a piece of trash like him. Albedo-sama wanted to rest for about 10 minutes, so I came to find you. WashOurWorldAudio.com. That is quite reasonable, given that she was speaking with all those guests. I understand. Then, I shall accompany Albedo-sama to the break room. Really? Then, I shall go too. What the hell is he talking about? That was the reply Hilma wanted to give. No, it might be that he had sensed something. With caution in her heart, Hilma continued her act. I feel it would be better not to do so. Why is that? I was by Albedo-sama's side until just now. It shouldn't be strange for us to go together, right? Now, Hilma was sure that this man had not suspected anything. In other words, he was a moron amongst morons, a good-for-nothing with neither the knowledge nor the etiquette to be a nobleman. I fear that if a lady is accompanied to the rest area by a gentleman who is not her husband, it might lead to the spread of inappropriate rumors for both parties. However, my plan is to immediately return once I get there. Even so, it is not quite appropriate. I understand your concern for her as the host of this event. However, I am also the provider of the venue, so please allow me to take on this responsibility and escort Albedo-sama safely to the rest area. It looked like he was going to say something else, so Hilma waited in silence for him to finish. The truth was, she wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. Unfortunately, this imbecile was also the driving force behind this gathering. She could not be too rude towards him. What do you think I should do in order to join myself to her in matrimony? Hilma had completely forgotten to stay in character because of his words. Say what? As in, a way to have Albedo-sama marry me? Seriously? Hilma desperately fought the urge to shout those words. She could hardly believe anyone could actually be this stupid. According to Hilma's information, the person he was courting was the Saucer King's right hand, in other words, someone who held a position equivalent to that of a prime minister. It was unthinkable for a low-class noble from a neighboring country to actually utter those words to someone like her. Perhaps if he had asked to marry Princess Rena instead, Hilma might have been less shocked. But you see, I'm a man who managed to gather this many nobles too. I don't think I'm that far behind her, what do you think? Without her realizing it, Hilma's throat had contracted tightly. Even though she knew those things would not be sliding down her throat, the unease and terror of the trauma she had suffered drove her to do so. No, that was not a thing which could be summed up with the word trauma. What if that person heard those foolish words, which held zero appeal to that woman? What would happen? It would be alright if only Philip had to bear those consequences. But if she was to be punished for it as well, that black hell might well be waiting for her. In any case, it's hardly workable. I heard she holds a position equivalent to that of a prime minister in the Sorceress Kingdom. That is to say, she would be a duchess in the kingdom. But isn't the Sorceress Kingdom a tiny marble of a city-state? No, you can't speak of it that way. Those words, which seemed to sneer at the Sorceress Kingdom, made Hilma break out in goosebumps. It was true that in terms of territory, the Sorceress Kingdom was not large, even with the Katsa Plains factored in. However, was their military power not overwhelmingly superior? Regardless of how much effort one put into trade, diplomacy and other fields, relationships between nations were still decided by their comparative military strengths. It did not matter how large a nation's territory was, because once that nation lost, it would all be taken away. If he did not even understand that fact, then how could she possibly explain it in a way that this twit could understand? Hilma pondered deeply, but could not find an answer. After all, wisdom and stupidity were two sides of the same coin. In the end, she had to reason it out for him. It cannot be done. There is no chance that woman would wed you, Philip-sama. But I thought the mood was pretty good. Didn't the two of us look good together when we made our entrance? So that's what he was thinking, Hilma thought in surprise. Could it be that he was trying to get people on his side by acting like he had the Sorceress Kingdom's backing? This fellow is the ultimate moron. Seriously, spare me, I'm begging you. Please don't make that person angry. Hilma felt something sour rising up from her stomach. Yet, at the same time, she wanted to let this fellow feel what it was like to have something squirming into his stomach. Perhaps I've said too much. Please allow me to escort Albedo-sama. You should stay here and enjoy yourself as the host, Philip-sama. Well, since it's like that, it can't be helped. I'll leave Albedo-sama to you, then. I'd do that without you having to say it. Hilma lowered her head, keeping those words in her heart. Then, in order not to hear any more of that nitwit's babblings, she made a beeline to Albedo's side. Albedo was speaking to a nobleman. Under normal circumstances, Hilma might have watched the mood and bade her time. However, dealing with that nincompoop had exhausted her, so she immediately cut in and addressed Albedo. Forgive me, Albedo-sama, it seems it is about time for you to have a rest. Indeed. My apologies, allow me a short break. Taking Albedo by the hand, Hilma led Albedo out of the ballroom. Phew. Ah, how disgusting. Hilma turned around as she heard the voice from behind her. If things were really that bad, what should she do? As she turned around, she saw Albedo dabbing at her shoulder with a handkerchief. Albedo's eyes met Hilma's. That disgusting man touched me. Only one man in this world is allowed to touch my body in a lustful way. Shit. That piece of brainless dog shit. Her words were accompanied by a gnashing of teeth. To think that her face, which typically bore a gentle smile, would actually display her displeasure so openly. Was that an indicator of how unhappy she really was? Hilma hesitated. Should she speak to her? Or was this a prelude to her punishment? What should I do? Say something. Ah, why yes. Hilma replied as her heart filled with an incomparable terror. I can understand how you feel, Albedo-sama. Ara, if that's the case, can you get rid of that creature and then prop up another human in his place? If it is your wish, then I shall immediately prepare another puppet for your strings, Albedo-sama. Albedo opened her mouth, and then closed it. She repeated that action several times. It was a very attractive suggestion, one which would make anyone hesitate. That said, it did not matter what she chose. Only hell would await him. Still, whatever happened to that idiotic Philip, one could only say that he had asked for it. Who? Never mind. He was just a regular nuisance. That person's foolishness made quite an impression on the nobles at the royal dinner, so switching him out now would be a bit of a waste. It might be fun to follow up on that. But no, probably not. Hilma recalled the conversation from just now, the wild fantasies and ravings of the absolute madman who wanted to marry Albedo. What would change if she told her that? No, that was too scary. She could not possibly bring herself to tell Albedo. After all, she might get caught up in that as well. He did nothing, but believes that he's the only special one. He has truly reached the ultimate level of incompetence. Indeed, soon I'll be able to splatter him all over the ground. He must be punished for the crime of touching this body of mine, which belongs to Ains-sama, with his filthy hands. They did not speak after that, nor did they meet anyone else. Hilma brought Albedo to a certain room. Once she reached that room, Hilma nearly collapsed due to her legs going soft in relief. Handling that woman alone, a confidant of that demon king who could even subdue that Jaldari, had drained an enormous amount of her stamina. However, not being able to remain standing was absolutely forbidden. Hilma gathered up all her strength. In her heart, she resolved to sleep for a full day after all this was over. This way, please. After Hilma opened the door, the men seated on the chairs within rose as one. All of them were as skinny as Hilma. They were Hilma's colleagues, the 5 branch leaders of 8 Fingers and their chairman, making a total of 6 people. They were also the people she trusted most in this world. In the past they had feuded over profits, but now they no longer thought that way. After learning about the link between Jaldari and the Sorceress Kingdom, their fates were now linked. They had no choice but to work like slaves until this country was consumed and they were liberated. These close friends of hers lowered their heads deeply as they beheld the very incarnation of terror, albedo. The fear they could not hide made itself visible in the trembling of their shoulders. Hilma closed the door to the room, and albedo took the highest place seat in the room. The men and Hilma did not sit down, but remained standing as they awaited their orders. Now then, in order for you lot, you are to transfer resources to the Sorceress Kingdom. Understood. I am eager to serve. The head of the smuggling division did not waste a moment in replying. How could he delay? Once they had been summoned like this, the only possible response to any order they were given was understood. There was nothing else they could do apart from that. The smuggling division's leader had lost a lot of power in the Traders Guild during Jaldabaoth's disturbance, when much of his resources had been stolen away. Even so, there were advantages to being in his position. This was because his dealings with the nobles that had taken part in the war against the Sorceress Kingdom had been conducted entirely with cash. Or perhaps, it would be more accurate to say that his power was slowly returning now that the merchants, who had extended credit to the nobles, were now agonizing about repayment. I am not referring to that. All you need to do is conduct trade at an appropriate price. After that, you will use the money earned to import food in preparation for the upcoming famine in the kingdom. Buy the rations which the royal army could not move out in time. No, start by trading in grain futures. After all, Ain-sama has already begun large-scale food production. The future which she spoke of would surely come to pass, given the massive drop in the kingdom's workforce. Understood. I shall mobilize the traders immediately. These are especially important. Make sure they're in the first shipment to come over. The man carefully and graciously accepted the piece of paper that she had tossed out. Yes. Then, what news is there about magic items? Another man seemed to jump into the air. My deepest apologies. He bent his waist and bowed so hard that he hit his head against the table, striking it with a startling amount of force. My subordinates are currently infiltrating the Magicians Guild to conduct an in-depth investigation on them. If I can be allowed a little more time, no. If you are willing to accept an in-progress report, I can deliver one right now. Never mind, then. Just speed your actions up. In addition, yes. Have you decided on your new colleagues yet? If so, we'll need to bring them back for baptism. The colleagues in question were meant on to fill the empty seats of the Eight Fingers as the new division heads. As she recalled exactly what that baptism entailed, Hilma choked back the urge to vomit. Similar expressions to hers appeared on the faces of her friends, who were desperately trying to keep their facial nerves under control. It was a fiendish rite which broke the will and completely erased any inkling of resistance within its subjects. If any of the people in this room were told they would have to undergo it again, there was no doubt that they would start bawling like children. I am very sorry, but we have not yet decided, said the chairman. This was the truth, and it was also a lie. The reason why he said so was because the divisions which the newcomers would head were now meaningless. The empty seats belonged to the chiefs of the security and slavery divisions. There was hardly any trade in the latter, so there was little benefit to having someone fill that position. As for the former position, the very need for its existence was in doubt. In addition, the gentlemen we were allowed to borrow have performed very well. It might not be out of the question to have them serve as division heads themselves. The gentleman in question referred to the undead which had been lent to them, each of which possessed unbelievable power. Once they realized that the Six Arms were dead, a group of subordinates, the leaders of whom had originally been workers, began plotting a violent overthrow. As a result, they sent out one of those undead creatures. In the end, that entity had eliminated nearly 40 people without letting a single one escape. There was another reason for doing so. Quite a laughable one, in fact. That was because nobody here wanted anyone else to go through the same thing as them. These hardened masters of the underworld who could calmly order the death of a man did not want anyone else to taste the same despair they had. This was how they protected him. I understand. It will be fine as long as the organization can function as normal. Then, do you have any particular requests for me? I fear to ask, but we have discovered that the skeletons have produced outstanding results in the mines I have acquired. If possible, we would like to hold on to them for a little longer. Of course. If you can pay the appropriate fee, there will be no problem. My deepest thanks. The speaker's forehead began sweating profusely. He wiped at it with a handkerchief which was so wet it had changed color. The frightening thing about the Sorceress Kingdom was not simply the whip that it wielded, but the sweets which it offered. They did not take everything away like the strong would do with the weak, but they conducted business like skilled traders and played by the rules. As long as they did not show any signs of betrayal, they might even feel the peace of mind that came from being protected by powerful beings. Of course, if the chance presented itself, they would still choose to flee in terror. Then, there's not much else for me to say in front of you. I believe I've mentioned this before, but do work your hardest to help the Sorceress Kingdom swallow up the kingdom in the future. In preparation for that day, you would do well to start making inroads at becoming legitimate businessmen. Understood. All of them nervously bowed to her. None of them would possibly object to the Sorceress Kingdom devouring the kingdom. Since these monsters had made their declaration, it was only a matter of time before it surely came to pass. At first, they had considered asking Blue Rose, Red Drop and Darkness for help. However, after hearing of the awesome power of the Sorcerer King, who counted Jaldri as one of his minions, they realized that there was no hope. All they could do was lower their heads and wait for the end to come. Oh right. Hilma and all the other members shuddered. There's one more thing I wanted to say. There's a magic item that I want you to use your intelligence networks to locate for me. Record your findings on the parchment at regular intervals and send them to Albedo in the Sorceress Kingdom. However, I don't know anything about its external appearance, so there is that. What sort of magic item would that be? It's a magic item that can control a target's mind. Mind control. A wand of charming or the like? No, it feels like it should be something stronger. I'm looking for something not in general circulation, a legendary item, or at least news about it. You must let me know anything you find, however insignificant it might be. Do you understand? The mind control of which she spoke was a terrifying effect. It was obvious why she would be wary of such an item, and so they immediately showed that they understood. Princess Sama. The maid opened the door and barged in, clearly panicked. She had not knocked, which was hardly an act that was worthy of praise, but instead implied something had happened which flustered her to the extent of not doing so. Rena immediately saw through what was going on. However, in front of the maids, Rena was an innocent princess. Because of that, she put on a suitably clueless impression and asked in an equally airheaded voice, "What's going on?" The maid's eye twitched. That tick had probably come from her anger within. Why was this princess so daft while she herself was so worried? Rena lazily placed her cup on its saucer. The sound of doing so seemed to jolt the maid back to reality, and she hastily sprang into action. About that. It's okay, it'll be fine, calm down, take a deep breath. The maid did as Rena told, taking several deep breaths to regulate her panting. After regaining a measure of calmness, Rena asked, "What happened? Is it demons again?" No, that's not it. The Sorceress Kingdom's emissary Sama says she wants to meet you, Rena-sama. Is it a lady? Yes, a very beautiful lady. Rena's question should have been strange because there was only one woman among the envoys from the Sorceress Kingdom. If someone pressed the point, they might wonder what she was on about. However, the maid was currently confused, and answered in earnest. Well, it's fine, Rena thought. The more silly things she did, the more she built a reputation which she could use. It was all just set up, anyway. Climb had been standing by her side. His armor clattered in response. He must not have been able to follow what was going on. His adorable actions, like an innocent puppy, filled Rena's heart with a surge of tenderness. There was probably no way he could figure out why the emissary was coming here to meet Rena. He had already seen her exchange greetings with Rena. That being the case, speaking with the third princess, who was little more than an ornament, would not bring any benefits to the Sorceress Kingdom. At least, that was what Climb should be thinking. Rena smiled warmly in her heart. What they said about children being cuter the dumber they were was most assuredly true. Or rather, one could say that one loved them despite their shortcomings. Well, it was probably correct no matter how you looked at it. If someone other than Climb had done this, other emotions would have come to the surface. Although she was driven by the impulse to look into Climb's sparkling eyes forever, she had to bear with it for now. At least, until the moment she was enveloped by that delicious sugary candy. Why exactly would Albedo-sama want to meet me? Tilting her delicate little head was very important. Doing so would induce a negative reaction in the worried party. Its effectiveness had been proven after several experiments. And sure enough, weak flames flickered in the maid's pupils. They were flames of anger. At the same moment, Climb's armor clattered softly. He must have sensed that maid's feelings and thought of something. But the sound soon stopped, and he returned to his upright and locked position. How adorable. He was like a puppy that was confused over whether or not to step forward, in order to protect his mistress. That was because it would be better not to move if Rena had not noticed. The maid was the heiress of a good family, and no matter what Climb said, one word to her parents and Rena might be in trouble. Climb had probably thought of that. He was probably crying inside, since he believed so much in Rena. If only he had a good upbringing, this sort of thing would not be happening. Rena resisted the desire to turn to look at Climb, who was standing behind her. This was because the interfering maid opened her mouth to speak. I do not know the reason, only that she wanted to meet you. Is that so? Albedo-sama's a woman too, so maybe it's girl talk. Is it about makeup? She asked that question in an innocent, or perhaps in a flat-out brainless way. I do not know about that either. Then, may I bring her in? Of course you may. After her reply of feigned delight, Rena turned to look at Climb. Climb, I'm sorry, but since this is a matter between ladies, could you step out of the room for a while? Understood. It was kind of a shame, but that could not be helped either. Climb did not need to know about bothersome things. All he needed to do was look at her with those pretty eyes of his. When Albedo entered the room, there was only one person inside. Albedo had 4 objectives in coming to the royal capital. The first was the transportation of resources. The second was to create a casus belli. The third was to lay the foundation for her personal objectives. The fourth was to make a trade with the owner of this room. No, calling it a trade would not be entirely accurate. This was more of a reward. Albedo strode across the room and took a seat without waiting for the owner of the room to give her permission. Then, she looked to the girl who was genuflecting before her with her head lowered, and said, "You may raise your head." Yes. The girl called Rena lifted her face. You have done an excellent job. Thank you very much, Albedo-sama. Albedo seemed quite interested in Rena's reaction, which was completely unlike what she had shown thus far. This was the Rena of whom Demiurge had spoken. She had betrayed her family, her bloodline and her people, but there was not a shred of regret on her face. She was human, yet she was inhuman. Perhaps she was a spiritual heteromorph. Her mind comprehended good and evil, but that was all. She was the type who was not bound by the petty constraints of morality, but who calmly worked to advance her own agenda. As a reward for your efforts, I have brought you a gift from Ain-sama. Albedo reached into the air, and pulled out the item which her master had given her for safekeeping. It was a box that bore several layers of seals. It was impossible to open without fulfilling specific conditions. This would be. As the girl accepted it with gratitude, Albedo watched her with a cold gaze, as though the girl was little more than a guinea pig. Indeed, she was a guinea pig. But because of that, both sides shared the same goals. You have my deepest gratitude. Please convey my thanks to His Majesty, Ainzulgaon-sama. That I promise you. I trust I need not waste words on the other item you want. Of course, I shall receive that boon once I have delivered the appropriate recompense. There is nothing more delightful than that. The girl smiled. It was a very lovely smile. That was why she asked. Although opening that box can fulfill your wish, can you really open it? What would the others in Nazarick think if they saw Albedo showing concern over a human being? That said, if her wish really did come true, then this could be regarded as preparatory work for her elevation to a status equivalent to that of an area guardian. In that case, it was perfectly understandable to show concern over a candidate for a subordinate's position. Yes, Albedo-sama. The preparations have already begun. Really now? Then, make sure they're finished before we invade. Understood, exalted mistress. As the girl lowered her head again, a pair of eyes appeared in her shadow. The shadow demon lurking within slithered forth and lowered its head along with the girl. Albedo considered whether or not to lend her extra reinforcements, but in the end she decided not to mention it. If the girl's actions were exposed before the Sorceress Kingdom invaded the kingdom, that would mean there was no value in taking her into Nazarick. In other words, all this was a test. Then, let us dispense with the formalities here. There seemed to be a change in Albedo's tone, and there was a surprising expression on Rena's face. Ending the meeting at this point would be too hasty. Is there anything? Let's chat, then. All right, sit. Can you tell me about your puppy? Albedo was greeted with a full-faced smile. I would love to, Albedo-sama. In addition, if I may, could you tell me about His Majesty as well? End chapter.